Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. We'll be discussing Indian poetics today and the name of the module is Indian Feminist Aesthetics. I am Shashwati Shah, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Sikkim University. The content of the module has been written by Mr. Rindon Kundu, Senior Research Fellow, Department of Comparative Literature, Jadavpur University. In this module, we'll be learning about Indian feminist aesthetics, but we'll begin with feminist aesthetics in general. We'll be looking at the women's rights movement that happened in India and how it helped in understanding what we understand by Indian feminist aesthetics today. The word feminism was derived from the French word féminisme, which means development of female secondary sexual characteristics in a male. In modern times, the term refers to the advocacy of women's rights on the ground of the equality of the sexes. Feminist aesthetics does label, according to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, to the cultural influences that exert power over subjectivity, the ways that art both reflects and perpetuates the social formation of gender, sexuality and identity, and the extent to which all of those features are framed by factors such as race, national origin, social position and historical situation. According to American Society for Aesthetics, the area called feminist aesthetics is a bona fide area of specialization within analytic philosophy of art and aesthetics, which strives to give voice to oppressed persons and open spaces for the disruption of unjust power dynamics and stands out as distinctly feminist in the realm of aesthetics and distinctively aesthetic in the realm of feminism. Elizabeth Lenk speaks of women having to bear the burden of the ideal of beauty. Women were effectively passive participants of aesthetics as audience and as idealized portraits. And we know how a popular media like film has given importance to this aspect, where women are always the object to be gazed at. And they have to be the epitome of beauty. The aestheticization of women is not the only trope in the history of art to give feminists pause in any deliberation of the history of aesthetics. David Summers' reading of the analytic categories of art criticism reveal the extent to which the property of the aesthetics belongs to males, while women function as figures to be fetishized rather than as creators. His summary evaluation of the history of art, including a detailed exegesis on the lasting influence of Plato and Aristotle on aesthetics, leads him to use their work as a point of departure. So women are considered never as creators themselves. They are a part of the creation of the male. So the world or the realm of creation belongs exclusive to the male population and not to the females. Feminism in the Indian context. If we go through the trajectory of feminism in India, we will see that it is a set of political, economical, social rights movement that seek gender equality in every possible sphere. Feminism in India can also be traced down to the heydays of 19th century Bengali Renaissance. Significant personalities from the Bengali Renaissance like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, John Drinkwater Bethune, Isha Chandra Vidyasagar, Sister Nivedita and others have fought for women's rights and their empowerment. We are all reminded of banning of sati pratha and child marriage and starting of widow remarriage, and these people contributed a lot to abolition of these social evils and in giving this importance to widow remarriage for finding a new life for women who were usually married off at a very early age and were widowed at a very early age. Indian feminist aesthetics as a phrase is a highly contestable term. But before starting the voyage into the ocean, let us start with the meaning of each and every word of the phrase. The term aesthetics comes from the German word ästhetisch around the 18th century, or the French word aesthetique derived from German. The root of the word is the Greek term aesthetikos, which means of or for perception by the senses, perceptive of things, perceptible, to perceive, to feel. The term next in question, feminism, indicates the qualities of the females along with the advocacy of women's rights. The earliest feminists were mostly men who had made a start to introduce reforms in upper caste Hindu society, addressing social evils like child marriage, widow remarriage, dowry, female illiteracy, and the practice of sati. Social reformers during Bengali Renaissance of the 19th century believed that the education was the primary key to social change for improving the degenerated position of women. Post 1857 was marked by a development of a cultural renaissance, amongst which women emancipation is one of the important cultural changes. So there were initiatives taken by these social reformers to introduce schools or a mode of education for women, and Bethune played a very important role in it. Even in the West, women were not allowed, as you all know, to attend schools and colleges along with men. Even when it began as a tradition in the late 19th century, women were chaperoned and only then they were allowed to attend classes. Raja Ram Mohan Roy had a vision for a better social, economic, cultural and religious spiritual dimension. He made earnest endeavors for the abolition of widow immolation or sati daha pratha. John Drinkwater Bethune, whose dates are from 1801 to 1851, had extensively worked for women's education. He was the founder of Bengal's first secular girls' school, the Hindu Balika Vidyalaya, in 1849, with Vidya-sagar as its secretary. Isha Chandra Vidya-sagar had fought for Hindu widow remarriage as well as for women's education, philanthropy, social reform in general, and others. To understand the real picture of Indian feminism, we have to understand the long and painful struggles for equal pay for equal work, the continuing battles on behalf of women's rights to abortion and the practice of birth control are some of the visible marks of the gender inequality that has persisted and that women had to fight for in spite of the commitments they were made under circumstances. Indian feminists faced hard challenge since Indian society is based on patriarchal hierarchy. The feminist thought and the feminist movement in the West have some influence on the women's movement in the developing countries like India. Yet, feminism as it exists today in India has gone beyond its Western counterparts. Why feminism in India is different from its Western counterpart is because India was colonized. So women over here are doubly shadowed. They are always the peasants of the colonizer who was more powerful than the men of the society, and the women were comparatively less powerful than the men. So they have two shadows over them. They were doubly shadowed figures, and they still are doubly shadowed. According to Uma Narayan, third world feminism as well as Indian feminism is not imitating the Western Eurocentric feminist agendas. Rather, Indian feminists think in terms of their own time and space. The woman, in order to literate herself and advance, needs to empower herself, to confess different institutional structures and cultural practices that subject herself to patriarchal domination and comfort. Between the mid-1950s until about 1978, the aforementioned feminist groups had been primarily engaged with small-scale, local, direct action, organizing for legal rights and increased political representation in India's relatively young democracy. But the goals of many feminist groups across the new nation were consolidated and reorganized at the 1978 First National Conference of Socialist Feminists in Bombay. In order to heal growing rifts between spatially disparate feminist activities, the largest feminist organizations resolved to focus their efforts towards broader social justice initiatives, mainly by working to combat manifestations of patriarchy in India's most populous regions. Since feminism is a struggle for equality of women, a struggle against all forms of patriarchal aggression, literary feminism was concerned with the politics of women's authorship and the representation of women's condition with literature. The struggle was not only about the woman's right to create literature, but it was also about how women are being portrayed and presented in literature that are being read by men and written by men. So therefore, the struggle is for both how they are being gazed at, how they are being represented and portrayed, and how they are being idealized. The National Council of Women in 1921 and All India Women's Conference in 1927 and 1930 protested against the feudal forces which kept Indian women under subjugation. Sarojini Naidu was in the forefront of the Indian freedom struggle and struggled to redeem Indian women from the clutches of slavery and superstition. In 1920, the power of vote was first given to women in Cochin and Travancore, and in 1921 in Madras Presidency. Many laws have been passed after 1947, like the Hindu Marriage Act and Hindu Succession Act of 1956, Dowry Prohibition Act of 1961, Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act of 1971, which gave a wide spectrum of rights to Indian women. The next section will be talking about emergence of Indian feminist theatre. Anita Singh, in her essay Aesthetics of Indian Feminist Theatre, has given a fair picture of Indian feminist theatre. Though the municipal vote for Indian women was acquired right in 1855, it had not been properly utilized by them for lack of education, lack of opportunity for self-development, lack of interest in social problems. In the charged atmosphere of the mid to late 1970s, socially relevant theatre and the women's movement began to show the way forward. A number of tabooed issues found expression and acceptance through theatre. In 1980s and 1990s, women's question entered the Indian theatre scene in a large way. Though feminist theatre was an emergent cultural form in the 1970s, it had its origin in the experimental theatre group and women's movement. The form of the experimental theatre and the agenda of the women movement shaped the content and mounting of plays. It sought a definition and found several. Production and script characterized by consciousness of women as women. Dramaturgy in which art is inseparable from the condition of women as women. Performances, both written and acted, that deconstructs sexual differences and thus undermines patriarchal power. Scripting and production that present transformation as a structural and ideological replacement for recognition and creation of women characters in the subject position. To begin with, feminist theatre thrived in cities and towns in India, primarily in non-commercial spaces. Jan Natya Mancha of Safdar Hasmi, which is a part of the People's Theatre Front formed in 1973, performed a street play Aurat or Women in 1979, which dealt openly with issues like bride burning, dowry and wife battering. Theatre plays a major role in reaching consciousness to the common people. So when certain issues are taken by theatre which are being played on the street, it will be more receptive on the part of the audience. So it is a very important move in spreading the consciousness among the common people. It was exciting because it dared to venture to the public with such diverse representation and explanations of women that it created a new audience for theatre. During the 19th century, many female authors carved out an important place for themselves in the genre of fiction and poetry. The stage remained largely closed for them. So many women practiced literature sitting in the corners of their home, but they were not allowed to come out and act in public. That was considered to be a shame. The last 20 years or so have seen a significant change in this respect. The Indian theatre is no longer the male preserve it used to be. Women directors, previously a rarity, have come to the fore. Names like Lakshmi Chandra, Chama Ahuja, Ipshita Chandra, Usha Ganguly, Neelam Mansingh Chaudhary, Rani Balbir Kaur, Sheila Bhatia, B. Jayashree, Arundhati Raje, S. Malati, Soumya Verma, Gauri Dattu, Nadira Babbar, J. Shailaja, Anuradha Kapoor come readily to mind. A great boost to the theatrical aspect of women-centered issues was the development of the IPTA or India's People Theatre Movement, active from 1943. Although, in fact, women's issues was only one among its cluster of various social, political and aesthetic concerns, subsequently a plethora of theatre festivals, workshops, ideologically committed theatre groups celebrating the cause of women burgeoned. To cite just a few examples, Akka, the National Women's Theatre Festival held in Mysore 2001, National Women's Theatre Festival organized by Yavanika, a theatre group based in Hyderabad, National Workshop on Women Purva, Festival of Asian Women Voicing Silence, Gender Theatre by M.S. Swaminathan Research Foundation organizes yearly festival and has held 4 interactive women's theatre festivals called Kulavai or Celebration. Samudaya from Karnataka, Kalakshetra from Manipur, Prithvi Theatre from Mumbai, Alaripu from Delhi, meaning blossoming, established in 1983, Rangagormi from Kolkata, Rangayana from Mysore and Kuttu, P. Pattarai from Chennai, along with organizations and institutions such as the National School of Drama, the ICCR, Nataranga Pratishthan often mount women-centered plays and ideologically committed theatre and use theatre as a medium for social change. Arpita Ghosh, in her essay Indian Feminism, a debate on the incorporation of the alien culture within the native tradition, says that feminism in India has been a long unsettled debate which is still persistently prevalent in various forms. Indian feminist researchers or women studies researchers have not yet been able to define Indian feminism. Unlike Western feminism, Indians do not have any clear-cut corpus of writing which can categorically be referred to as feminism or feminist writing or theory. According to Professor Samita Sen, gender has been a central issue in India since the colonial encounter. An overwhelming preoccupation with the woman's question arose from the 19th century social reform movement, crucially informed anti-colonial nationalism and remains a point of crisis in India's cultural, social and political space. The recognition of gender as an issue forms the basis for India's women's movement. One prominent gender concern was status. That is, the reward and benefits that accrued to women on India's journey to self-determination, statehood, democracy, progress, modernity and development. In 1974, the Indian government published a report towards equality that put status of women forcefully on the national agenda by arguing that the position of Indian women had declined, not improved, since 1911. As a result, development and progress became gender issues. Data on gender discrimination in employment, education, land distribution, inheritance, nutrition and health became impossible to overlook. The recognition of gender as an issue powered the post-colonial women's movement supported by feminist critics and women's studies in academia. Women mobilized to protest violence, legal discrimination and rising prices and agitated for better living conditions through higher wages, the prohibition of liquor and the provision of drinking water. These women represented a wide range of castes, class and communities, rural and urban. But differences among these women grew, fracturing not only the category of women but also solidarities among them. In 1986, the developing tensions were exposed and fueled by the Shah Bano case. Discrimination against women in personal law had been on the women's movement's agenda since the 1920s, but the Shah Bano case catapulted the issue into a crisis of national proportions. The case intensified a process in which nationalist ideology, religious fundamentalism, communalism and caste tensions were pitted on the side of gender. Thus embattled, women and the movement lost the fragile unity and broad identity in which their differences and diversities were contained in the first phase of their active political engagement. Today, the women's movement in India is deeply cleaved. There is, nevertheless, a vigorous search for a viable feminist politics. To succeed, feminists must develop transformative politics, managing and hopefully transcending class, caste and community differences. Empowerment is the buzzword of the 1990s, but there is little consensus on the definition and use of the term. Indeed, most of the time it seems to be transparent and so not in need of definition. According to Bina Agarwal, empowerment is a process that enhances the ability of disadvantaged, powerless individuals and groups to challenge and change in their favor existing power relationships that place them in subordinate economic, social and political positions. In a general way, the emphasis on power is a response to post-feminist and feminist critique of the earlier focus on victimization. But indiscriminate application of the term is likely to trivialize it and diffuse its potential. Since independence, the Indian short story has matured considerably and is able to reflect the socio-cultural realities with precision. We can ascertain the emergence of the new woman in Marathi, Hindi, Punjabi and Indian English short story by women writers of the last 50 years, roughly from the 1940s and the end of 1990s. The period mentioned here shows remarkable changes not only in the society but also in women's approach to traditions, social norms and personal priorities. The later 2 decades of the 20th century witnessed the rise of the new woman who insisted on being in conflict with the male, learns to realize her women power by rejecting choicelessness, accepting responsibility for the self. So this new woman was born in this late 1990s is the woman who is fighting for her rights, not just against the male but also patriarchy in general. We have to understand that patriarchy does not only mean the male part of the society. Women also perpetuate patriarchy. Women also internalize certain ideas of patriarchy and criticize other women who want to live an independent life. So this set of women were trying to take up their own responsibility for themselves in their own hands. They were no more dependent on the male members of the society or their family for that matter. The march, however, is not smooth, and the short story writers have judiciously balanced in their narratives the lived reality of women's life and their own convictions. The women short story writers of India place their protagonists in the social milieu and portray them convincingly. The cultural patterns run through the stories like a thread. Despite provincial differences, the representation of the modern Indian woman with her typical social and psychological realities and problems is authentic, recognizable, and inclusive. The authors seem to agree that the travails of the Indian women are not yet over. Until the new awakening comes about fully, women have to share in the commonality of experience of violence, denigration, and exploitation and break their silence to voice their particular experience. The comparative study has the potential to stimulate thinking on issues relevant to Indian society as a composite whole. From this module, we have learned that feminism is defined as cultural, economic, and political movements that are focused towards establishing legal protection and complete equality for the women. In Indian writing, feminism has been used as a modest attempt for evaluating the real social scenario as women are concerned. So, we have to understand that feminism is a broad term and every small region have their own social issues and problems. So, Indian feminism is a very particular category that pertains to women from India, the challenges they are facing in their day-to-day life, their lived realities. In this module, we have learned about how Indian theatre, short stories, and other genre of literature are trying to deal with these issues. They're bringing this to the forefront, enabling the women to voice out their problems. I hope you have enjoyed the module. Thank you.